Right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the first edition of AgileTD Friends. I'm Kevin Harris. Hello. I'm in England at the moment, and I'm so pleased that today we've got Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory with us. So thanks very much for agreeing to do this. Do you want to actually just tell us where you are at the moment?
I am in Vermont, really close to Canada, and northern Vermont, northwestern Vermont, near Lake Champlain.
And I'm in a little village called Windermere in British Columbia, Western Canada, in the mountains. And I think it's almost spring here. I can see snow in the mountains, but the snow is all melted on the ground. So I'm really hopeful.
Yeah, it got above freezing here for the first time in it seems like weeks.
We actually had double digits last week. Am I echoing?
Yeah, we've got about 10 now as well. So yeah.
Nice. Spring is in the air.
Pointing out the time differences between us all. So I'm 7 o'clock in the evening.
It's noon here.
And 2 o'clock here.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, this is a new format for us for Agile Testing Days and for me. So we're going to do it as hopefully as a conversation. We're going to discuss a few interesting topics, maybe go off script, depending on the on the types of things we end up talking about. I guess the place to start is it's been quite a strange year. One of the reasons we're doing this and we're all in different places and we're all online is because of what's happening in the world at the moment. What's actually happening in your locations? How's it affecting you? Lisa, do you want to go first?
How's the pandemic affecting you?
I mean, are you in lockdown? Has it meant you can't go out? What's your current state?
We're in Vermont where there are hardly any people anyway. But yeah, we have a lot of restrictions. But weirdly, we used to be one of the best states for the lowest infection rate. Now we're one of the highest. I don't know what happened, but people here are quite law abiding. You know, they obey the rules. They wear their masks. It's really nice, and it's pretty easy to avoid. We buy most of our food from the farms all around us, and yeah, so we feel very lucky to be here.
Janet, how's it affecting you in Canada?
Well, in this little village that we're at is, again, kind of like Vermont, I'm thinking, not very many people here. So we all wear masks. If you go into the grocery store, it definitely, everybody has a mask on. There's just no exceptions. If we go into Calgary, we see a little bit different behavior. But it's pretty good. People are generally pretty good. We've been managing it fairly well. There are days when I think we don't manage it so well, but yeah. So I am getting an echo. Do you hear an echo?
We don't hear it.
Okay,
I can
that's
hear
good.
A little one in the background, but
if it's just me, then I'm
twice, which just makes it twice as good. Really.
Yeah, but I got to say, in Canada, we're not managing the vaccines as well. We're a little slower. There's some, because we get our vaccines from Europe and from the US, and both those places have said us first. So we're down at the bottom of the list.
It's so mean.
It's so mean. No, it's just the way it is. So
how's this year affected you work-wise? Is it less travel? Are you just working from home constantly?
I was already working from home. So it actually is a benefit for me because more companies hire remote people, and the last company I joined, I was going to be the only remote person, and then everybody was remote, and then I got a new job starting in January, which same thing happened. It was a co-located company, and after they did a few months with everybody remote, they went, you know what, this is pretty good. We could hire people anywhere in North America or South America, anywhere within 3 time zones. So now we have this much larger scope of people to hire, and that's how I was able to go to work for them. So for some people, it's created more opportunities. For other people, it's really been hard. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. Janet, how's it affected you? You're on mute, Janet. We can't hear you, Janet. Can you do it in mime?
I will say, when Janet, one of the things that affected me and Janet, because we have our Agile Testing Fellowship with our Agile Testing for the whole team, on which was a live 3-day course. And so we very quickly, and by we, I mean Janet, very quickly had to transform that into a remotely facilitated course. And she did a great job. And it's been gratifying that our trainers around the world have done a wonderful job making this available remotely, which is, again, a real advantage for some people who wouldn't have had access to the training otherwise. So it makes it easier. It makes it more affordable for people. So again, it's a mixed bag of blessings and
very strange this year. I mean, I think this week is the anniversary of when I last went into my office. It's really strange.
It's a 1 year for most people, I think.
Yeah. Janet, you're still on mute.
I still can't hear you.
Yeah. We could shadow puppets is another good thing.
It's just like that keynote she had at Agile Testing a couple of years back, where the projector wouldn't work, and Janet's husband Jack brought her a big glass of wine while she waited on the stage.
Oh, nice! Yeah,
because it was the last keynote. I think it was the last keynote of the conference.
Yeah,
technology, it's a blessing and a curse.
Well,
your show is muted. Does somebody? Does Ina need to unmute her somehow?
I'll let Ina try and talk to Janet in the background. While we're doing that, Lisa, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
Just so I mean, how did you first get into kind of IT and testing?
Well, I first got into IT as a programmer trainee, so I was able to get a job in a program that they didn't want you to have any knowledge. They wanted to train you so that everybody wrote code the same way, which is brilliant. And I really enjoyed that and did that for a few years. And then I got into tech support at a software company. And this is back in the 80s. And so we were still releasing software. There, Janet. We're still,
can you hear me now?
Yes. Well, we were still releasing software on tapes back then. And, we'd do these releases every 6 months or something. And customers would call us and say, how could you not have noticed this huge bug? This is terrible. And we're the people answering the phone, providing support. And so we asked the developers, could you maybe send us the tapes? Maybe, like a week before that you send it to the customers so that we could check things out ourselves and start working on patches. And then when the customers call all mad, we say, don't worry, we'll have a patch ready for you in a few days. And the developers were like, oh yeah, sure. And then our managers were like, that's a really interesting idea. Maybe we should test it. So they started a testing and release department, and I put my hand up because I thought it was fun.
Can I ask what year that was that you kind of start on that testing journey?
I want to say about 1990.
Okay, cool.
Just a year or two ago.
Yeah. And Janet, how about you? How did you start on the whole IT and testing journey?
Well, actually, we lived overseas for a couple of years. I'd followed my husband to Singapore and Jakarta back when my children were young. And when we came back to Canada, I decided I did not want to go back to work for the government. It was not something I wanted to do. So I kind of opened up a university calendar and a couple of other things, and I decided to take comp sci. And so I went back to university, I went to university as a mature student and graduated and started to be a programmer. But it was funny because even going through university, I knew that programming wasn't where I wanted to be. But I did it for about 6 years until I had what my manager came to me one day and he said, so Janet, we're going to start a test team. And you are the one programmer who complains about process and lack of quality. Would you please be our QA manager? So that just started me down that whole path. And so, yeah, I think I was always there, just so much more fun. than programming.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Lisa, so you're both now into the whole test sphere. Probably for me, when I first started, it wasn't even called testing. We didn't even have a test department. So how did you kind of realize that was where you belonged? And then how did you kind of realize that there were ways of changing the way testing was thought about?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yes.
I mean, for me at the time, it was just knowing that we could help the customers and cause them much less pain by finding problems ourselves. And then we was like, gosh, we should really work with the developers and try to catch these problems earlier. And we were in Colorado and our developers were in Germany, and we actually started getting to travel to Germany or they'll come to us to actually work in person, work together. What a concept. And so seeing the benefits of collaborating, having people in different roles working together on the software, you're going to come up with a better product for your customers and make your customers happier. So I think that was the reward. And I like the detective work of debugging and problem solving and also, because I do enjoy coding. So it was fun to do some test automation and had automated regression tests and things like that. So there just were so many different challenges to solve. And it was an opportunity for me to learn how to use all the different platforms, all the flavors of Unix, back then, even things like OS2 that nobody has anymore, VAX, VMS, Wang, as well as, the mainframes that I started out on and then getting into PCs, Macs, mobile devices eventually. It's just so much variety. I think that's one thing I like about it.
Janet?
And constant learning.
Mm-hmm.
So was it similar for you, Janet, kind of moving into testing? Was it?
Not so much because as I said, so when I first got out of university, my very first job was interesting because we didn't have testers. So as programmers, I sat down at my desk and my supervisor would come in every day, first thing in the morning, and he'd say, "So Janet, what are you working on today?" And we didn't work in pairs or anything. We all had our little cubicles and kind of sat there. And he'd sit with me and he'd say, "So Janet, what are you working on today?" And I'd go, "This is my assignment." And he'd go, "So what are you going to do with it? How are you going to test it?" Every morning he would come in. At the end of every day, he'd come in and he'd say, "So Janet, what did you do? How did you test it?" Right? So it got ingrained in me. And I think when I went to this other job, I was expecting the same kind of thing, due diligence by the programmers to test their own stuff. And it wasn't there. And then, so that's the job that, put me into QA manager role, which then I promptly went and learned everything I could possibly do because it was kind of a QA manager / test kind of role. But I found it just very frustrating because I was in that role for about 4 years and I just found it so frustrating. And I've got more than a few stories that I won't share. But I finally got fed up one day when my manager, when I was talking to him and said, "Hey, we're never getting any better. We're still shipping the same crap. What are we doing here?" And he'd say, "Oh, but Janet, we're so good at responding to that stuff." In other words, he really liked that reactive mode. When a bug would come in, let's fix it and do it. And that was kind of the day that I realized that was never going to get any better. So I quit. And then the next job I went as a QA manager, but the dev manager and I were much more on sync. And we're trying to do XP, right? Extreme programming. And we did a pretty good job considering neither of us knew what we were doing, but we had really good people. And then the .com bust happened and I found myself, and I consider it was probably one of those pivotal moments in my life, found myself a tester on a true Agile team. And I went, this is what testing's all about. It's just collaborative, working so close, and never look back. Never look back.
Was that the first time you'd heard of Agile testing as a concept?
Well, no, I didn't even hear of Agile testing as a concept. It wasn't in my vocabulary. We were doing extreme programming in both cases. But that's where I met Lisa, was because I, got on and said, somebody help me, because I don't know what I'm doing. And so, yeah. And so I reached out to her via Brian Merritt. He was very much a gentleman, and said, hey, Lisa's writing a book. And so that's how I got to know her.
I guess that's a good lead in to Lisa. So how did you get to that stage of recognizing Agile testing as where you wanted to be, recognizing that's what you were doing? And then actually, let's start there, and then I've got a follow-up question for
Well, I had been, my early experience was probably, looking back, I would call it Agile. But I eventually got working in waterfall teams, and I worked on some really good waterfall teams that did all the good development practices that we recognize now: continuous integration, test automation at all the levels, everybody collaborating, even though we were waterfall, collaborating through all the phases, that kind of thing, and automated deployments, things like that. And then I didn't join my first web startup, before the dot-com bust, while things were still exciting. We were still trying to do waterfall, and it was so fast paced. Our competitors were getting the features out so fast, and we were like trying to, okay, well, let's get more disciplined about our phases and our handoffs and our code freezes. And then we'd release, and then our competitors had beat us every time. And then somebody handed me a copy of Kent Beck's Extreme Programming Explained. I'd never heard of extreme programming, and I read it, and I was like, it's all about quality. It's all about people. It's all about working together. It's all about testing. It doesn't mention testers, but I'm going to ignore that fact. And so when some people I was working with split off and went and did their own startup and said, hey, we're going to do extreme programming, I made them hire me.
Just pushed your way in, huh?
When did it transform into Agile?
I guess after the Agile Manifesto, people started calling it Agile.
Was that when you kind of first heard the term? Because that's 20 years ago. What, last month? So that's...
Yeah. I don't think I actually heard the term Agile testing as such until we wrote our first book and tried to name it.
That's true. That's true. There was Agile. Yeah.
So Lisa, starting with you, what led you to want to write the book?
Well, so as Janet says, we met because we're on, back when we had mailing lists, like this is the antiquated days of the internet. We had an extreme programming mailing list, and we both knew Brian Merrick, and we started talking to each other and also posting on this XP mailing list, which was quite welcoming, even though they didn't think they needed any testers. And my team and I kept discovering, like trying things like, okay, this works pretty well. This works pretty well. And there were all these books being published on XP, but nothing about testing. And so I was like, somebody should write a book on this. And I kept telling people, somebody should write a book. And so people were like, no, they said, you should write a book. So I got my co-author, Chip House. I talked him into doing it with me. But Janet was our tester for our book. So we would put together a chapter and say, okay, this is what works for our teams. Hey, Janet, see if this works for your team. So that was a big help to us. But we wanted to share what problems we had solved, because we knew there were many more problems to solve. And we figured if we can just get over these initial problems, then we can all work together to get the harder problems going forward. So
when you actually worked together on the book, were you doing that remotely? How did that interaction work between the two of you?
So when we wrote our first book, we were remote. She was in Denver and I'm in Calgary. And so we actually did it in a very agile fashion. We had a release plan. We did mind mapping, trying to figure out what our chapters should be. And then what we did was we each took a chapter, like something we were passionate about, and we'd start writing for a week. And at the end of the week, we would exchange, and she'd copy edit mine and add, and I'd copy edit hers and add. And then we'd send it out for review to other people. And then at the end of that, we incorporated all of the the reviews and kind of put it all together and had another review or two. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we went through a couple of rounds of.
And it was funny because we met at a conference when we had done the first draft, I think, and we were going to work on it together to make sure that we had it, what we wanted. But because we'd been working on it remotely, we got together in the hotel room and we didn't know what to do together. Sitting side by side, we didn't know what to do. It was quite funny.
That's really weird.
And went back to working remotely.
Okay. So did you ever argue about any of the contents, or was it all smooth sailing?
Probably not arguing, but we do disagree on some things. And there's some things we do, but that's where you'll get Janet's story, Lisa's story.
Right.
Because we have a little bit of a different opinion. But I think the reason our partnership has lasted so long is because we do agree pretty much on everything.
Yeah.
Especially on the big ticket items. Yeah.
Would you say that's fair, Lisa, or was there?
Yeah,
I disagree with Janet on that.
very true. And maybe because we learned together, and our teams tried sort of this. We have this similar problems and tried similar things to fix them. And we also started for even for our first book, we started talking to teams all over the world and interviewed them and like, what problems have you had? And we discovered, there's a lot of commonality and a lot of people running into the same problems and are approaching them the same way and succeeding. And we got a lot of input in both our books from other practitioners, which was really reinforcing. And I was so gratified when the book Accelerate came out by Nicole Forsman, Jess Humboldt, and who's the other author, Jean Kim. Based on the State of DevOps survey, which is a scientifically based survey. And if you read that book, the data behind it, it supports a lot of the things that we've been telling people for years. Like the team needs to collaborate. Testers need to work closely with the developers. Developers need to own the automated tests. This needs to be a collaborative effort. And it was nice to have scientific affirmation of the things that experientially we had seen work.
Yeah, that's good. I went silent there for a minute because I'm just thinking about where I'm working at the moment and about some of the things that, that you're saying and how we could apply them a little bit better. But I think that's the same for every work environment at the moment. Is there's and I think what makes testing such an interesting job is that there's always something new and there's always a new challenge.
And I think one of the things you have to do is if you hear something from somebody, then to think about how can you apply it to your work effort, right? One example, I think of it as testing, kind of, is when Lisa and I were writing our second book, we heard a friend of ours said, this is what we did when we wrote our book. So we tried it. So we'd written all our chapters and we were trying to decide how to put them together. So I got on a plane, went down to Denver. Lisa printed off all our chapters, all the stories, everything else. And we went down into her basement and we learned to work together in person that time. And we put everything on the wall. And we cut and pasted, to tape, and we'd say, nope, this section doesn't belong here. It belongs over there. And it was a very physical type of collaboration, and it works so well. And I think you just have to experiment, right? So I probably didn't do it the very same way that our friends did it, but it worked for us. And so that was kind of fun. But it was testing our thought processes on how it should go together. And it turns out we were wrong completely.
But that's still really good, is it? Because the thing is, when you are wrong, you experiment, you find out you're wrong, and you learn something. And that's another one of those facets of testing that people sometimes don't understand. Is okay to fail. I mean, what's the worst thing that's happened to you in a kind of a testing environment, Lisa?
I probably blocked those things out on my memory. Right?
Oh, I know what I did one.
Tell us, Janet.
Yeah, no. And it wasn't when I was even, maybe it was when I was testing. I don't remember. But it was back in Unix days when I was working in Unix, and I did something and I was at root instead of where I should have been, brought down the whole system. And I just sat there and I thought, okay, can I go hide in a corner now? I'm sure that it was me. because everything just stopped working. But I got up my guts, just kind of went deep breath, walked into our fixer person, and I said, I think I messed it up. This is what I did. Right. And he said, oh, yeah, that's really bad. but because I actually went in and told them, they were able to fix it fairly quickly. If I had run and hidden, they wouldn't have had any idea what had happened. They wouldn't have been able to trace it to me because it was like, but they did make some changes on who could touch root after that.
Well, and that's the thing is, it's really important to make it so that people can't fail in that way. And if they do fail, it's not their fault. The safeguards weren't in place. And I've done the same thing exactly as Janet. Well, it was a little different in that we had different, we had tests and staging and production, and I had access to all of them. I got my windows mixed up. So I bounced the server in production. Fortunately, it was just the internal server. It wasn't the one for external customers, but still. And so they're like, okay, Lisa, we're taking that away from you. But the other thing that they did was to, for both the app and if you were on a terminal, they changed the color scheme. So if it was really obvious if you were on production. So internal people who got on production, they knew they were on production. So that was another way to just keep people from doing stupid things.
Make it obvious. Yes.
Yeah. But it's also learning from the mistakes as well, which is a big part of what we do, I think, these days. So just going slightly in a different direction. So obviously you are incredibly well respected and well known in the industry, but this is an industry where actually some places women do struggle to get ahead, to even get a fair shake of working in this industry. So I'm just wondering if that's something that's affected you, or whether that hasn't affected you in your careers. Janet, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about that. I think for a long time I didn't realize, right? It just wasn't talked about. It was just not there. But when I think back to a lot of the early days, right? There's certain things that are just taken for granted. And an example, my very first job as a programmer, I went back, I was a mature person, older than my cube had 2 people in it. And the fellow that was the other programmer was younger than me with 2 small children. And one day when we were actually working on the same thing, and he walks in and he puts a bunch of stuff down on my desk and he says, Janet, can you copy this for the meeting? And I just stopped. I mean, I was older, so that I think helped, right? My confidence. And I picked up the paper, I went and copied it, and I took it back to his desk and I put it on and I said, don't you ever ask me to do that again. I am not your secretary. I said, if you need it because you're in a hurry and we're collaborating, ask me nicely to help. But don't ever tell me to do something like that again. And I think you have to be aware that that's what's happening, right? And the fact that I was older, I think was, I was always working with people much younger than me. And I think that was to my advantage mostly. So I didn't feel a lot of the things that other people do.
Lisa, have you had similar experiences or?
Well, I got into programming in 1982 when programming was a low-paid, low-status job, so there were lots of women. Terrible that that's true. And so I feel lucky I got in when I did. And I'm a bit oblivious. I was very lucky. I had great opportunities all along. But I only realized that I was paid much less when in the late 80s, our manager at the software company, she made the other managers get in a room, put everybody's name on the whiteboard, what job they had, and how much did they make. And they saw dramatically that the women in the same jobs and same experience, same skill level, same position as the men had dramatically lower salary. And she was a friend of mine as well as my manager. So I found out about that, and she got them to fix that. But it was just like, whoa. And I'm sad to say that I recently heard of a case of a young man and woman pretty much out of college with the same skills hired for exactly the same job at the same company, and one makes $10,000 less than the other person.
Yeah.
It's just not right. It's still happening. We're better off than we used to be, but change is not as fast as I hoped it would be.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my
Early
next question, as to whether you thought it was easier now or harder now, or just the same problems in different formats.
I think a lot of the same problems in different formats in many cases. I find it very different from company to company as well.
And I know for a while that I was also hearing lots of stories of harassment and abuse. I haven't heard those stories lately, but I don't know if it's just because I'm working at home and I don't get the opportunity to hear those stories.
Yeah, I think for me, it's different in some ways and worse in some ways. You look at the social media side of it, and some people just get pilloried on social media, and it's very strange concept, I think, for me.
I find it very strange too, but it does happen. I know it does. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess this one's for you, Janet. So when you found out that your daughter was getting into the industry, what was your reaction then? What advice did you give?
Actually, a lot of pride, right? She's always been a very strong person, and I think it showed. So when she was in grade 12, we moved to a new city, so she went into a new school, and she walked into the school, and she'd had so in grade 10 and 11, she had taken computer science in school, taken a couple of classes, but it was all kind of focused more on hardware and a little bit of other kinds of things. When she went into this grade 12 class in her new school, she walked in, she's the only girl, and the teacher stood up at the front of the class and said, "You must be Susan. I know you've had some classes, but we're going to be doing this. We've done this, this, and this, and we're going to be doing this, this, and this. If you don't think you can keep up, you may as well walk out." And so she came home that night and she said, "Mom, you have to teach me everything you possibly can." And so he threw a pop quiz at her for the class the next day. And of course, she failed miserably because she knew nothing of what they had been learning. By the end of the year, I went in for a parent-teacher interview, and she said, or the teacher said, he said to me, he said, "So, you know, that very first quiz, Susan must have had a really bad day because she's done so well. As it turns out, she was the top of the class, beat every one of the boys, but that's what Susan is, right? She's strong, and she's had no trouble whatsoever as she was going through, and has done quite remarkable." So,
yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah. So moving on to a different subject. So the other thing you're both very well known for is conferences and talks and kind of that side of your careers. So how did you kind of get started on that side of it? Lisa, would you like to start?
Well, I always worked for companies that couldn't afford to send me to conferences, and I couldn't afford to go myself because all these equines that were eating up all my money. And so it's like, well, if I got accepted to a conference, at least I would get a free registration, and maybe I'd even get expenses paid. So I started submitting to conferences. This is back in the 90s, late 90s, and getting rejected. So I got really smart. And this is back when you had to write a paper also, to not only just do a talk. I said you had to submit the paper along with your proposal. And so I asked the tech writer at our company if she would help me. And so she helped me edit my paper and made it quite professional, and I was accepted. And that you just have to get in once. Once you've spoken at a good sized conference and you can say that you have, the other conferences are like, "Oh yeah, good to go." So you just have to get over that barrier.
Do you remember what your first talk was?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I don't actually. I can remember my first one that was about extreme programming for XP 2001, and it was I think we called it the need for speed or something like that. It was like, how do you do testing in an XP environment? That Tip and I did that. Tip, my first co-author, and I did that together. I didn't get to go to the conference because I got laid off and I couldn't go to Sardinia. But he went to the conference and presented.
Lisa brought me in to talking at conferences because we had, I met her in person in 2002 at the XP conference. And then she said, Janet, we should do a talk together. And so she drugged me up on stage and we paired for our very first talk. I was really not a good speaker back then at all.
And now she's way, way better than I am.
So what makes a good speaker?
I don't know. It took me a long time. I took 10 years of Toastmasters because it just, speaking is not my natural forte. Or up on stage, I can talk forever in conversations, but to get up on that stage, it kind of drives me crazy every time. Takes lots of deep breaths, get up there and doing it. What makes a good speaker? Having something to say.
Just
right?
like writing a book.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing Lisa pushed me to. Yeah, didn't push, pulled. I guess pulled would be a better way.
Coerced.
Yeah.
So Lisa, is it the same for you? What creates a good speaker in your mind?
You know, interestingly enough, of the software company I worked for where I first got into testing, they put on a big user conference every year that like 1,500 people come from around the world, and they wanted all of us to do presentations. And they actually brought in somebody to teach us how to do public speaking, which I thought was really awesome. And so I got kind of learned some good principles there, but I am not a good speaker. And I think what pairing really helps me is having somebody else there. I get less nervous. And, you know, anything you do together with another person is going to be better. But also, quite a few years ago now, I read the book Training from the Back of the Room by Sharon Bowman. Different people have recommended that to me. And I learned how our brains work and how we learn and how can I, as a facilitator, make a better learning experience for people. And that helped me a huge amount. The evaluations I got from the people that were in my workshop suddenly were transformed. And that's why I like to do the interactive sessions, and especially if I get to do them with somebody like Janet or anybody. I've paired with so many people over the years because I've tried to bring a lot of newbies along with me to get them to let them have their first conference experience so they can go on and do more. And I don't like doing just the straight talks. I still get too nervous, and yeah. So you got to find what you enjoy doing the most and what you're good at.
It's amazing though how many people who are renowned as good speakers are nervous about it and don't like it and have that reticence about going up there. But once they're up there, actually it does seem to flow. But there is a nervousness about public speaking that I don't think you ever really get over.
No, and I think it actually works in your favor because it gives you a little bit of adrenaline and your passion comes through more, I think. But there's so many skills that go along with that, like pacing yourself and all of those sorts of things. I think a lot of new speakers, and that used to be me, you start to talk too fast because you're just so nervous that you think you need to put it all out there right away. And so just pacing and slowing down, and that takes experience. Just, you have to get up there and do it, right? There's no other, I know of no other way to learn.
Yeah, my first talk in Europe, which was in Belgium, I think. It was maybe my second or third conference ever, and it was in Europe, and I had 45 minutes, and I think I got done in like 20 minutes because I talked so fast. It was mortifying, and there were about 300 people in the audience, and there was like no reaction at all, no questions.
Oh.
And fortunately, Hans Buvalda was speaking after me, and he was so nice. So he came. I was like, "This is great because I have too much material, and I need the extra time." And then later, he took me aside and gave me a lot of pointers of how to solve this problem. So it's great to have a community, like at Agile Testing Days. If you want help with your presentation or you want feedback, people will help you in a kind way. There's nothing worse than having somebody come up right after you finish and start criticizing your performance. But when later on people see if you want to help and offer it in a nice way, it's really nice.
Well, I will often even just go ask somebody, especially if I know them in the audience, I will go say, hey, Kevin, would you sit and pay attention to this and give me feedback after? I've been trying to work on this, right? And so I ask for feedback, and I've had people do the same thing to me. And I think that makes a difference too.
Is there any other advice you'd give for people who are thinking about doing their first talk?
Practice. Pair practice.
That's going to be the title for the next book, is it? Prepare and practice.
Well, and I also one advice I give to newer people is I love to help people with their proposals and their abstracts. And 9 times out of 10, they've got way too much that's going to fit in a 30-minute time slot or a 45-minute time slot. And so the advice I give is, what's the one thing you want people to take away? Because they're probably only going to take away one thing, no matter what you say. People just can't retain that much. So what's the one thing you want to get across? Focus on that. And you're going to have to cut out a lot of stuff you would love to say. And maybe there's another way you can give that information with a handout or a link to something you have online. But just keep your focus and help people learn that thing.
I guess one of the interesting things is actually applying for a conference and actually putting your proposal in is actually very different from actually having to give the talk itself. They're two really different parts of the same coin, as it were, two sides of the same coin, but you have to be good at both, really.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but getting people to review an abstract is something simple, right? Like I've just been reviewing abstracts for a conference right now, something I've been doing. And so many of the abstracts, you just sit there and you go, I can't give you a great mark because you're not telling me what the important thing is, right? And so you don't even know what it is. And so having somebody help you with that abstract is a first start. But then having somebody help you with the talk. And there's lots of ways to get people like, I know I've mentored people through, what's it called? Tech voices.
Tech voices, yeah.
It used to be called...
you scared it out of me, Janet.
But
the thing that Anne-Marie Charrett and Fiona Charles started.
Yeah, exactly. There's ways to get help and mentoring, right? There's lots of us in the community that would be happy to mentor any new people. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing as well. And it's one of the things you're kind of both known for is your willingness to kind of help and reach out to people. So
thank you.
What makes you want to help people in that way, and what interests you in the people when they do ask you for help?
Yeah, it's all for. Oh, go ahead, Janet.
I was going to say, for me, it's about giving back, right? Lisa helped me so much when I first got started in public speaking, but also in just reaching a little bit out of my comfort zone, right? And there's so many other people. Yeah, it's just community. We're building the community together.
Yeah, and it's paying it forward. People have helped me hugely. And the other thing is when I pair, so for years I paired with new speakers because this was a way to get the new voices in, because before Agile testing days, there were not a lot of conferences that were trying to help get women into them doing workshops and doing keynotes and things like that. But the bonus for me is somebody will say, oh, I'll pair with you, Lacey Hawk or Steph Desby or Abby Banks or Emma Armstrong or Joellen Carver, all these people I paired with. And they have an idea for the topic. And they have an idea for a great workshop format and great exercises. And I'm just along for the ride. I'm giving advice on how much I think we can fit into the time slot and how, let's hone the exercises some. But I'm just getting a kind of a free ride. And I learn a ton because it's a topic that's not familiar to me. And I mean, some of those topics have become my passion going forward. And fortunately, these generous people let me keep using their material.
I think one of the things you both talked about there is the community side of it. And for me, I mean, I've been a tester for over 20, and a twester as well, but a tester mainly for over 20 years. But it was only like 2015 I kind of found out about the community side of it. So what do you think of the community, and how's that kind of affected how you work?
Well, so Agile Testing Days, the conference, has really amplified the community, I think, as well. And it's I think when I go to the conference, which is why I really, this last year not being able to go to the conference, it's felt like there's something missing, even though it was online and I got to see a few people and I get to chat with people like you now. But there's something missing, not being there in person and things. So I'm really looking forward, hopefully, to November, maybe June, if everybody gets their stuff vaccinated and things. But the community is about, to me, almost family, being able to share ideas and learn from everybody.
Yeah, the contrast, when I started going to testing conferences in the 90s, I found it kind of unwelcoming. These events, you know, the speakers didn't talk to the participants or attendees. And when I went to my first Agile conferences or extreme programming conferences, it was an incredibly welcoming place. These people who were the leaders in the field would sit down and help and spend an hour with you with answering questions. And that really had an effect on me. And that's one of the things I try to pay forward. But, you know, the Agile community was just more welcoming and more helpful in that way. And I feel like Agile Testing Days like really picked up on that and somehow magically embraced that. And a few other conferences and communities have as well. And it's really, really special to me. And so I want to keep enlarging and growing that community, do what I can to help.
I'm going to tell a story now, even though I shouldn't be talking about me at all. But my very first Agile Testing Days, I virtually knew nobody. It was the first conference I'd ever been to just by myself, without colleagues and things. And the first night, I ended up going out for a meal, and I ended up sat on the table with the pair of you. And that was my very first Agile Testing Days conference, my very first night, not knowing anybody. And I end up on a table with a pair of you eating an evening meal. It's absolutely fantastic community when you kind of, and it's so welcoming. That's the thing I think for me, is that it's everybody is welcome, even if it's your first day or whether it's your 10th year there.
Yeah, I try to be really aware of. I know that we are like a family, like Janet says, and I try to be really aware that for new people, maybe we're going to look like a clique, and I try to make sure, like, and I think it's true. It is still welcoming of new people, but that's the hard thing with communities, is you can get a little too insular, and then other people are on the outside looking in. So embracing everybody, that's really the hard part and really key.
Yeah.
I know we are kind of getting close to the hour, so it's probably a good time to start talking about what's behind you at the moment, Janet.
My banner. So I put the banner up because I have a closet behind there. It's hard to keep neat and clean stuff. So the banner is from the Agile Testing Fellowship, which is what Lisa and I have co-founded, and Jose's part of as well. But it's the umbrella to teach our course all around the world. And so we've been getting really good reactions because we have great instructors that teach it everywhere, South America, Europe. I actually just did a course in Japan while I'm sitting from my own desk. But so we're really getting it around the world, and it's to get that community again, to be able to have everybody hopefully meet someday. But right now it's just a online community where they can ask questions in a safe place, share what they've learned.
Yeah, Lisa, what was the motivation? What was your motivation for it as well?
I was made to do it. But at the same time, there are a lot of people starting a few years ago who jumped on the bandwagon. You know, originally everybody said, "Oh, XP's terrible. It won't work. Agile's terrible. It won't work." And then it's like, "Oh, those people are making money. I will be Agile now." And there were a lot of training courses being spun up that were not helping people. And so the chance to get information based on real experience, and now that there are enough people that we know that are experienced practitioners, they know how it works, they have their stories to tell, they can really help people learn hands-on. I am really proud that we're able to provide this and together with our trainers, because this is the real deal. This is how you and your whole team learn to tackle these problems of testing, fitting testing into Agile, building quality in with Agile. And so even though I don't feel like I've been a very good entrepreneur or running a business, thank goodness I have Janet and Pepe as well. And it's delightful to be able to help people.
Yeah, and I really think it's still the only course that teaches the whole team. We call it Agile Working for the whole team. And so every time I get a call and people say, well, I want my testers, and I go, well, that's not going to help you. You really need to get the team to understand what testing activities have to be done throughout. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work if it's only the tester that gets training, right?
Cool. So what do you think is going to be the next stage of testing? How do you see it changing in the future? Because even in the 20 years I've been doing it, it's changed so drastically, and it changes virtually every year. So what do you see as the next major changes that will come along?
I am going to do the typical consultant answer. It depends, because I see a whole range of, I get to see these companies that are on the bleeding edge, and they're learning new things, and they've done this. But then I'm looking at these companies that have never even heard of Agile. They're just learning now. So that spectrum, when we say what's going to happen in the next 10 years, well, these people that are on the edge, that are on the bleeding edge, they're going to be taking advantage of all the new technologies and all the new stuff. But there's so many teams and organizations that are still, some of us were 20 years ago, right? And so there's a spectrum. So is testing going to change dramatically for some people? Not so much for others. And so I think it really depends.
Lisa, you going to sit on the same fence?
I like this comment there. What I like to tell people what I think will happen, because it's what I want to happen. Maybe I can make it happen if I tell enough people. But what I really hope is that we'll embrace the right side of the continuous testing DevOps loop, and testers really need to get involved on deploying, monitoring, observing production behavior, learning from production, doing testing in production where it's feasible and where there are things you can't test in your test environments. There's just a whole wealth of good that we can do on that right side of the loop. And if testers don't get involved with that, we're not going to get the benefit of it. So testers are kind of afraid of that. It's like, oh, I'd have to learn new things and learn to use new tools. But they're just tools. It's just like learning the tools we do for exploratory testing or accessibility testing or security testing or automation or anything we do. So we can learn those tools too. Easy for me to say because I'm in a new job and I'm trying to learn stuff and I'm afraid I can't learn it. So I understand everybody's fear.
I've got a strangely off-kilter question here. So my kids started secondary school recently, and obviously they have an IT department and they do a course. And I went in and I asked them a question about, did they talk about testing? And of course they had the big chart with all the job roles, and there was like 7 different types of coders, and they didn't mention testing at all. Is that something that we can change, that whole way that testing is perceived in the industry?
In the industry or in academia?
Let's start with academia, because it then feeds into the industry, I guess, doesn't it? So what can we do differently?
I think get into the universities. They're behind. Like academia has always been probably 10 years behind the industry. But for example, in December, I gave a guest lecture for, there was a university in British Columbia that was having a testing course for their people. And he was teaching unit testing, a lot of different things. but I went in and gave a guest lecture. I think by bringing some of the real life into academia, into these students' lives, it helps. And I think that's the first start. So I'm seeing the odd course in universities, but it could be much more.
Lisa?
Yeah, it has been frustrating, and I've heard a lot of stories from people who even quit their universities because they're like, I know it. I've been programming since high school, and I've read Pragmatic Programmer and a lot of other good books. I know how to do it better, and this is ridiculous. I don't know if they're doing a better job. I know that right now I'm working with people who are pretty much right out of school, and they're happy to embrace practices like test-driven development, mob programming or ensemble programming, as many of us prefer to call it now. They're very open to ideas of, acceptance test-driven development, behavior-driven development. They're happy to do testing together. And so, I don't know, maybe it's not a very big sample, and maybe it's just these individuals, but perhaps something in their university prepared them to at least be open-minded and willing to learn new things.
Yeah, that's what I got out of my university, was being open-minded and learning how to learn, kind of thing, I think, more than anything else.
Cool. We are running out of time, so I'm not going to hold. I'm going to ask one last question each, which is the typical interview question if you're going for a new job is kind of, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What do you think is the next phase of your careers? Lisa, you go first.
I want to say retired. I don't think I can afford to do that. I just would like to be looking in 5 years. I'd like to be looking back and saying, back in 2021, you were really worried about learning the code again. I'm trying to get a lot of my technical skills back, and you were really worried about learning these great tools to make use of observability and stuff, and you did it. So I would like to have accomplished these goals in 5 years, and to see everybody coming along on that right side of the DevOps loop.
I really like that idea of where, looking back, what would I like to be proud of what I'm doing right now? I really like that. I have to think about that. I would say in 5 years, I'd like to be sitting on a beach somewhere, but that's it can happen. I think that, so one of my role models has always been, I've got more than one, but is people like Mary Poppendick or Linda Rising, right? They're both out there still speaking, still part of the community.
Still learning.
Right? Not working full time. I'm trying to cut down my workload, but be able to be and participate in the community and still learn from things. I can't see myself ever just retired fully, right? I can't. Yeah. I don't know what that would look like.
I have to, at this point, thank you, Janet, especially for that brilliant segue. Because obviously this is our very first one of these interviews we're doing. The next AgileTD Friends is on the 20th of April. And Linda will be on the panel for that. So
that's great.
We're going to be talking about how the brain works and the correlation between that and mental health. And so we're going to be looking at that next time on the 20th of April. So thank you.
Linda and Becca. That will be an awesome one. I'm looking forward to that.
Right, I'm going to end it there. So I'd like to end up by thanking you both. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Janet. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and thank you for all of your great wisdom and all of your inspiration, and not just now, but for many years. Thank you both. I hope to see you in person soon. But take care.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody at home. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.